Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. I'm really excited to be talking about a really big conversation that's been happening in our industry for the past years around NPS. And today we're going to discuss this live with everyone on the call. So appreciate you all joining. I'm going to share a couple slides about the presentation and we'll take it from there. And please feel free to use the comments in the LinkedIn Live. We'll be making sure that all of the comments are tracked, and if you have any questions following it, we will be able to address those. All right, great. Well, to get things started here, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll talk through it. All right. Just bear with me here. This is actually the first time I'm using a new streaming platform, so making sure everything is good to go. All right, so the topic today is cancel NPS. And there's this very polarizing topic. A lot of folks in our industry are very one-sided on this, that NPS is either helpful to organizations or it actually prevents us from seeing the truth. And today we're going to talk about alternative to NPS that's really tracking a lot of interest, and it's called value perception score. So we're going to kick off here. Really quick about me, my story. I was actually a NPS follower back in the day. I was an implementation manager and really owned the post-sales teams at a Series A fintech called DealCloud about 10 years ago. And it was a pretty incredible journey. Our software company was a CRM platform in the private equity space. We got acquired in 2018, went public in 2021 through our parent organization, Intap. We grew from 2 to 250 million in ARR and 15 to 800 employees in 5 years. So it was a great growth journey for us. But through this journey, one of the biggest challenges was measuring customer value. It's incredibly hard to do this, and we did not have a great metric for it. So we relied on NPS. And I'll talk more about the issues with NPS in a second, but that journey led me to co-founding Foresight. We're a SaaS platform that helps organizations solve value problems, and we work with customers across the world. Outside of work, I love tennis, cooking, and performing, and I'll close it out there and we'll get to the content. All right, so the purpose of this talk. Our industry is going under immense pressure. There is a lot of conventional thinking that has got us to this point in 2024, right, where SaaS is nearing $1 trillion in spend, but that's conventional thinking is not going to get us to the next success in the next 10 years. Customers have more options than ever, and products are becoming increasingly commoditized in the space. AI landscape is transforming everything, and it's a lot easier to launch products and ultimately buy products. Customers have more choice. And as a result, our space is getting hit hard. Customer success is rife with budget cuts, with reductions in force, right? We're seeing this all the time. And I've been hearing this as well. I'd love to hear in the comments for folks who are resonating with this, but I'm also hearing that renewals and expansions are moving to AEs, to AMs, to other teams that may not necessarily be directly owning the customer. So there's a lot of transition in our industry, and it's just difficult for folks to know where things stand. So as I said before, we need to challenge conventional thinking to stay relevant as a SaaS industry, but ultimately grow and become the visionary companies to change the enterprise landscape that we can be. So I want to take a second here and get your take on NPS, right? Do you agree or disagree that it's useless? Do you think it has value? Why? Where does it have value? Why? So please take a second right now, add a comment in. Would love to see the discussion here around what folks are feeling. Are you on the pro NPS side? Are you on the con NPS side? Why? Let's take 30 seconds here and let's see what perspectives you all have. All right. See the comments coming in. So I'm going to hit the comments that have been here so far. Diane Gordon, a big fan of this talk. She's a good friend of Foresight and myself. And so thank you, Diane, for being here. Allison, NPS is utterly useless. Yes, I think you'll have a lot of alignment there with this group. And, you know, it's difficult to measure, which we'll talk about why in just a second here. All right. Any other comments? NPS alone is useless. All right, Ron, thanks so much. Okay, cool. Well, Olha, NPS is useful if we additionally use open-ended questions. Great. Well, this is all good feedback, and we will keep the conversation going here. Kate, mostly useless, very little for specific feature releases, but never a holistic measurement. All right. So I think there's alignment here that NPS is not always a productive metric because it needs to have context. It needs more meat to it. So let's keep going and talk about what are some of the beliefs that underpin why NPS is not very useful. First is that revenue is a byproduct of value, right? And value is a squishy, amorphous term that a lot of folks are talking about. And we'll discuss what value is, but value is central to the problem here. Well, value is only defined by your customer, right? It can't really be defined internally because value is in the eye of the beholder. So we believe that revenue comes from value, but value is only defined by your customer. And if you're not able to measure value, you're losing out on revenue. And really, this is the challenge that we have in our space today. So if you have any reactions to that, would love to see your comments on this as well. But otherwise, we'll keep going. All right. So why does NPS not work? And for those of you who may not know what NPS is, it's Net Promoter Score. It's broken down into a 0 to 10 score of promoters, passives, and detractors. And let's take an example of this, right? Where Net Promoter Score asks a simple question. How likely are you to recommend our product or service to a friend, right? So if somebody answers that question and says, hey, I'm a 3.2, I'm a detractor. Well, what do you do with that information? Truly, what do you actually do? What's the next step? What's the next best action? If somebody answers, hey, I'm a 9.1, I'm a promoter. Well, what do you do in that case? What do you do next? It's really hard to know why. Why is that customer a detractor? Why are they a promoter, right? And the NPS is one-dimensional. It can tell you the what, but not necessarily the why, because I have no visibility into that following the response. And definitely very little impact into the revenue, right? I don't have any visibility into revenue. So one more piece of data here. I like to share a lot of research that great folks in the industry have done. And Greg Daines is a big voice here in the churn space and NPS space. And I love the research he's put together. I've linked it down here in the deck, and I'll put it on the last slide for thought leadership. But there's no correlation between satisfaction and retention. There really isn't, right? No matter where you are on the NPS spectrum, if you're a 10 promoter or a 0 detractor, it really doesn't have a big impact on the lifespan of a customer. That's interesting. We put all this onus on NPS, but it has no real output on you as a long-term customer. Why? There's something to that. All right, so let's talk about the alternative here, VPS. And I'm going to address a comment here from Olha. Thank you so much for engaging. We ask why and what our customers do and don't like in our cooperation, then analyzing these whys. Yes, so it's really important to analyze these whys and understand that. Yes, we should ask why. Ron here. I think there's a bit of delay in the comments here, so bear with me if there's a bit of lag. Okay, so introducing VPS, Value Perception Score. What is it and why is it better than NPS? Well, first of all, VPS quantifies customer outcomes, right? Customer outcomes is critical to measuring value perception score and critical to this entire philosophy of thinking differently. And so we'll talk about how we do that in a second, but also not just quantify, but measure the perception of key stakeholders across achieving those outcomes. How do the stakeholders, executives, champions, and end users perceive those outcomes are being achieved? So VPS can tell you the why, because we're now focusing everything on outcomes rather than a one-dimensional, hey, how would you tell a friend about our solution, right? Because that doesn't tell me anything about what you perceive outcomes to be. VPS also provides actionable next steps in terms of how do you generate more outcomes for your customer so that you can generate more revenue. And I want to point to another research study here. This is also through Greg Dane, so double shout out. We've got other folks in the thought leadership section I'll hit on later. But there's a process of the measuring value, right? Just measuring value for a customer increases their lifespan. So it's really interesting how this is going to relate to the second part of our talk here. But when you talk about value, not necessarily NPS, customers are much more engaged. They feel like you're speaking their language. And even if they're a negative, they're not getting outcomes, they will still stay longer than a customer who has never been measured before, right? Because you never asked them about their outcomes. All right, so let's talk about the how and get into the weeds here about what do we do? How do we measure VPS? And I want to say it's a journey. It is not a point in time. You can't just send out a survey and hope for the best. You need to have this as part of a process. It needs to be an organizational, really philosophy and initiative to drive this, because there's some pre-work required. And because of the pre-work is why it's so impactful. So first step of VPS is defining value, right? We need to map, how do your customers think about value? Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. The next is measuring that value, right? We want to quantify those customer outcomes and build a whole journey around it. And third is transform that measurement of value into revenue realization. And this is where forecasting, expansion, retention becomes so much focused on, is the customer achieving their outcomes, not necessarily, how do they feel at a point in time. So this is a critical process. And I first want to hit on this, which is what is not value, right? Value perception score. That's critical to this whole theology. And value is not certain things. It's not usage. It's not utilization. It's not engagement. It's not your NPS score, obviously, and it's not your health score. So what is value? Value is a hierarchy, okay? It is multidimensional. And ultimately, it's going to help you generate revenue. But in order to get to that, you have to think about the key pillars. First pillar at the top is desired outcomes. How does a customer want to engage to help them achieve a business objective? We'll define that in a second here. For every single outcome, there is a workflow supporting it. This is where your solution comes in, right? Or your offering. Your solution is going to help customers quantify their desired outcomes. It's going to help them enable it, execute it. And there's use cases, right, of your solution. That leads us to the third layer below. We call them jobs to be done. There's specific use cases of your solution that are going to help execute workflows for your end customer that's going to help them achieve their desired outcome. So we have to build this hierarchy for an organization, right? That is how we start to define customer value. And I also want to touch on each one of these levels maps to a type of person, a persona, a stakeholder. At the bottom layer here, we've got the jobs to be done, the use cases. Well, this is where your operational end users, right? Your folks who are clicking to a software, running workflows, importing data, managing tasks. That's where they live. Well, they have jobs that are going to help execute the workflows. That's where your champions come in, right? Your champions are helping to drive a initiative forward, and they report to the strategic executive buyer. So the strategic buyer cares about the outcomes one-to-one. They're probably not even logging into any technology at all. And they're not even, knowing what their end users are up to in the most part. But as we go up this hierarchy, what the challenge is that we lose the perception of value, right? We start to lose, how do the strategic buyers and the champions actually perceive us? Because they're not using a technology. We can't use, usage, or even, NPS is not really valuable there because it's not helping them measure the outcomes. So we got to map all of these three layers to specific people. I'm going to go through a really quick example here of what is value. And I'm going to use a testimonial from Microsoft. Actually just gave a version of this talk to them a couple days back. But The whole concept is take a testimonial, right? That is value in the eye of your beholder. And so there's a testimonial on their website from the senior manager at Lenovo who's using Microsoft Dynamics. This is all public information. And they're talking about how they're getting value, right? And I won't read this whole quote, but a couple highlights is they are seeing the benefit of a standardized system, right? Dynamics is a CRM, standardizing everything. This is the foundation for sales digital transformation. So it really is about a big outcome here. So we can break this down and codify this value into this hierarchy, into this framework. And so there's a couple different dimensions of the stakeholder here, who's the senior strategy manager. This is champion, that middle layer at Lenovo. And the outcome that this individual is trying to achieve is digital transformation. So now we know what they're trying to achieve is totally transform their sales organization. There's a workflow there of enabling better connections and increasing sales productivity, all right? And a specific job to be done. I need to do something, right? I need a global view to see all my geography's activity. So the whole point here is we can actually hierarchically define what value is, but it takes a process. And this is the foundation to VPS, right? But it's so important to hit on this because we need to codify value before we can measure it. All right, let's keep moving on here. So how do we measure? How do we measure value? And this is one example. There's a lot of different ways that you can measure it. We have a tool called a value assessment, and it's directly linked to the hierarchy of value. And the key point here is that it's multidimensional, right? We're not asking a single point in time. And I know folks have asked, Ron, you got to ask why, Olha, you got to ask why, right? This is asking the why in a very non-invasive, but aligned way to how your buyer thinks about the world. So these assessments are personalized. They can be sent to exec buyers, the champions, and end users ahead of key milestones in the value journey, right? As soon as they close a deal and they're in onboarding, send them the value assessment. As soon as they're 3 months post onboarding, send them another value assessment. 3 months before renewal, we got to figure out what's going on. Send them a value assessment. We're seeing, and we've done a lot of research here, and we help our customers with this as well. These things get 70% response rates. It's amazing, right? What is NPS? 1%, 2%, maybe 5% if you bribe someone with a $100 Starbucks gift card. But these have no incentive behind them, and they're organically generating 70% response rates because it's all about value, right? It's about what the customer cares about, and they want to self-report what they're doing. So I'm happy to show an example here and actually walk you through a really quick, view into what this looks like, because it's, I think it's going to be edifying for us here. So I'm going to switch my screen share and actually present to you a slightly different page here, which is another window. So just bear with me 1 second. All right, so we should be seeing here now the value assessment. And I'm going to go through this really quickly, right? Just to bring it to life for everybody and how this is actually helping companies to quantifiably measure the value. So we've got outcomes here. This is sent to an individual prior to that executive business review, prior to the onboarding. People are even using this in the sales process, but it asks a couple questions around, okay, for an HR tech solution called Turbine, this is a demo example. We're sending this to a chief human resources officer. All right, great. Well, they want to improve employee retention. Well, CHRO, tell me, how important is this to you on a scale of not important to incredibly important? All right, well, how well does our solution support this, right? What is your perception of the solution supporting this on a scale of not currently doing anything with this to support employee retention, or maybe it's going really well? So from this, what we're able to do is go into specific workflows, right? We hit on the outcomes. Well, employee management is one example of a workflow that is going to help achieve employee retention and what the CHRO cares about. So same thing here, specific jobs to be done, right? So we hit the outcome, we've got the workflow, we've got the job to be done, and now we can start to measure importance across the job to be done level, effectiveness, also challenges and pain points, any comments that might exist. We see a lot of people enter great commentary here. So it really gives you more contextual information about what is the reason you're not achieving your outcome, the why. And it's psychological because customers will tell you more when they're given a menu, right, to interact with rather than a flat one question. And we're seeing a really strong response rate on this. So I'm going to come back to the presentation. I just want to give you a quick flavor for what something like this could look like. And let me switch over my screen here. Back to the presentation. Bear with me. All right, I think we're back. And we are going to keep going here. So we've got the value assessment. We talked about that. Next is, well, what data do we get from the value assessment, right? VPS is calculated on the back end. What we're able to do is quantify all of those scores, the importance and the second column of how do they perceive it's going, right? How well do they perceive it's going? We can calculate that into a single score called VPS. And we don't have time on this call to go through the specific model and mechanics, but ultimately it is taking all of the inputs of those effectiveness scores and turning into a single metric. So we can start to see that. And people are embedding this on value realization plans. They're embedding this on success plans. Here's an example of how you can embed that onto a success plan, right? And this is an example of a success plan. But you can start to see here that across the different stakeholders, right? We got Tara, who's a CHRO. She actually completed the assessment. We've got Lydia, who's an HR manager, and Susan, who's an associate on the team. So you can start to see specifically how the VPS is calculated and what they perceive across these different outcomes. And the next piece about this is turn that into actions, right? So what folks are doing is taking these VPS scores and turning that into specific actions that they can take to help improve that score, because now that score is directly tied to an outcome. So if you improve that perception, well, then you're going to be able to improve the outcomes and revenue is going to fall from that. So actions can be pertain to your solution, right? Maybe you need to reframe the workflow for permissioning or change how the site's configured or train someone better on how you leverage the solution. So all these will directly link to the VPS score, which is underpinned across this data model of value. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of kind of math in the background, but ultimately you can track this in Excel, right? The point of this talk is to give folks a different way to look at the world. And once you've defined the value data model, that hierarchy, you can send out these assessments, capture that in a CSV, and you'll get a ton of rich data, right? It doesn't require data scientists to go through necessarily, but you'll start to see all your individuals, the stakeholders, what they responded to in the hierarchy, and ultimately what the scores were. So this can all be output into Excel, crunch the numbers, and output that value perception score. Another piece I want to hit on here is the value journey, right? And VPS is not a point in time. We had talked about that prior. It is measured across a journey. And this is from Winning by Design. We're big fans of Winning by Design here. And they've done a ton of research, a lot of playbooks about the value journey and how it unfolds over time. So now think about that measurement of value happening from the first touch with a prospect all the way through the 10th renewal, right? It's not just, hey, we want to do this once and gut check. Well, if you build a process around this, an operating model, as Winning by Design talks about it, well, now you can start to truly connect the dots of where were they in pre-sales. They said they got a 25 value perception score. Their current solutions aren't working very well. Well, in onboarding, that moved from a 25 to a 35. Okay, some progress. And then 3 months post onboarding, that went to a 75. Awesome, you get a lot more value. And so it starts to build over time. And that's really important to tell the story later on to your customers when it's time for renewal, as you can probably imagine. All right, so wrapping up here, there's great examples of this happening with real companies. So I'll share one example. This is all anonymized, but we actually tried this out with a company, right, VPS, to see does it actually generate revenue for organizations. And we worked with a publicly traded fintech. Again, it's all anonymized, and engaged 83 of their customers. So just to prove to you how VPS can link to revenue, they executed this value measurement through assessments, right? They had other means as well, asking this why. And what they were able to do is get a pretty clear score back. And those customers fell into one of three categories. The first is revenue growth and retention. Scores came back positive. So customers were feeling like they're getting outcomes achieved. So 47% is pretty good of their customers. But some customers also reported that they had a big need for an outcome, but they weren't using a solution yet for it. So that's a great upsell opportunity, right? If somebody says, I'm trying to achieve this outcome, I think your solution's great, but they report a couple jobs to be done where they're not leveraging the solution. Well, that's clear upsell opportunity. So it links nicely to revenue. And also on the flip side, for churn, right? If that score comes back negative or it's not very good, well, now that's a problem. You can take actions with it, as we saw before, link specific actions to increase that value perception score and start to play that back to them. And there's a bucket where it takes time, right? This data takes time to bake out, get the responses. We typically see responses happening within 7 to 9 days, 5 to 9 days, right? Of sending these assessments out, because there's like a sequence here. You can send those assessments out on a reminder sequence. But we get a 70% response rate over that sequence. And so it takes a couple of days to bake out, but then it falls into one of these two categories. Awesome. So nearing the end here, I'm gonna make sure we leave time for questions. So VPS drives executive engagement. It's really amazing how executives feel bought in, right, to the process because they're getting asked about their business outcomes and what they care about. So here's a qualitative anecdote from one of those executives who's a managing partner of a financial institution who went through this, right? They actually went through the assessment process and they said that this is so illuminating. I finally see how my team is leveraging the investment and I want to be more engaged. I want to see how I can be a supporter internally. So buyers are saying this. This is huge. This is the person writing a 7-figure check, right? So it's cool to see how this ultimately hits the executive buyers and gets them bought in. All right. So at this point, if you all have questions, please put them into the chat. I would love to answer them. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm also going to link all this. I'll put this into the comments of the event afterwards, but more thought leadership on this. And I want to call out a couple folks, Julie Persovsky. She's written really great thought leadership on the reevaluating efficacy of NPS. Dave Jackson, measuring customer value. He's got an incredible blog that he updates. I think he just posted one a couple days ago. And I take a lot of inspiration from that. I mentioned Greg Danes a couple times. We also launched a podcast. This is not directly about NPS, but it's a podcast called Future Customer Value. I host this every week and I interview global leaders. Recently had the leaders of LinkedIn and Zoom, CS leaders on the podcast. You can get that on Spotify and YouTube. I've linked that out here. Again, I'll put that into the comments page. And if you want to reach out to me, you got my email. Feel free to hit me up. And I also want to give you all an offer here, which is if you are interested in wanting more VPS, we're planning on doing these thought leadership sessions more often in your organization. So I've had a couple people this past week say, hey, my CEO should hear this, right? My CRO needs to hear this. Well, let's make that happen. If you're interested, please scan this QR code. It'll take you to my HubSpot meeting book link. Book some time there and let's get the conversation started because as I kicked off with, we are in the business of helping people think differently about their current process because what got us here will not get us there. We need to be doing something different in order to elevate our industry, to deliver more value to our customers, and ultimately generate successful outcomes for all of us. So thank you so much. I will stay on. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and we will take it from there. All right. Any questions? Okay, no questions yet. Again, there's a bit of a delay, so I will still stay on if you're interested to ask any questions. I'm going to go through the other comments and see if anybody's posted anything that I haven't hit. Thank you, Ron and Olha, Kate, Allison, for all commenting and engaging. Thank you all so much for joining. For those of you who are still here, we will have the recording for this and you all can view it at your leisure. And I'll post all the links again in the event comments so you have access to that. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in. We're at the time, about 30 seconds left. So thank you again. I'll just leave you with this, which is NPS has become so commonplace, over the past 20 years. But before that, it wasn't commonplace, right? There was other metrics. So we go through these cycles. If you're feeling frustrated with how NPS is perceived internally, you're not alone. We're here to help. You've got a community of folks who are also galvanizing to change this, make it more impactful, and not have drudgery at your job because your compensation is based on NPS, right? That should never be the case. Hopefully not. But great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to close it out here, and I'm available to continue answering questions on the comments in the chat. That'll still be live. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your days, and we'll be doing this again next week, different topic, and we'll have guest speakers as well. So plan to join then, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.